In this video, we discuss some of the most common purchasing mistakes people make their first few years in retirement. Coming up next on Holy Schmidt.
Holy Schmidt!
A few months ago, I released a video called 6 Big Purchases Retirees Almost Always Regret. It is one of my most popular videos, over 600,000 views to date, and it has a lot of comments. Overwhelmingly, the comments were positive, but there was a theme that emerged with a number of the commenters, and that was that, number one, I left a few things off, and number two, some of the purchases that were inappropriate at the early stages of retirement were completely appropriate at the later stages of retirement. For example, one of the comments I made was that people should not buy a second home outside of their primary residence because it sits empty for 10 or 11 months of the year. One respondent replied that they were planning on moving to Florida after the kids moved out of the house, but didn't want to fully commit to the move until after they were in college and on with their lives. They continued on and commented that they currently rent the home out to others and they recoup most of their annual operating costs, including the mortgage payment. Their anticipation was that they would eventually live there full time after all of their local obligations were done. Fair point, and with that lens, the argument for a second home made a lot of sense if someone could afford it. So I focused this video on the things that are almost always universally bad in the beginning years of retirement. All right, let's get into it. But before we do, there's a lot that's going to be happening over the next few years with Social Security, with inflation, with your investment portfolio, with medical costs. And I work very hard to get what's out there in here for you. And the only way for you to get notified is to click subscribe and turn on the notification bell. All right, let's go. Point number one are the expensive toys that you will undoubtedly use less than you think you will. Let me explain. When you were thinking about your retirement, you had a dream. You planned on what your retirement would look like, and that included a lot of interaction with family and friends. And so therefore you wanted to have the tools necessary to make that interaction happen. You planned on buying an RV and traveling across the country, and over the course of a few years, you would explore this great country in all of its detail. You would also own a boat, and let's say you were planning on living in a place like Naples, Florida. You would take your boat and you would motor around Marco Island on a daily basis with friends and family. And you would drive up and down the streets of Naples in your convertible sports car because that's what people do when they are in retirement. These all sound like a great idea, but the fact is, most of them turn out to be a money pit. If you buy a $250,000 recreational vehicle, for example, and that is not an unreasonable amount to pay for an RV, you will undoubtedly enjoy it for a short period of time. Eventually, you have to come back home and your RV either sits in your driveway or it sits off-site in expensive storage. As you think about making that trip the second or third or fourth time, the open road gets to be a very long road and you start to find reasons not to take your RV out. Similarly, your $100,000 fishing boat is great when you put it in the water in May, but when you take it out of the water in September, it sits unused for the next 9 months. And that expensive sports car, it is totally cool until you try to put your grandson in the back seat and realize there isn't really enough room for someone back there. By the way, you can rent all of these. And although it may seem expensive comparing one use to amortizing the cost out over 15 or 30 years, believe me when I tell you, most people will come out way ahead by renting it once or even twice rather than buying it and using it only a few times. The next no-no is a timeshare. The newly retired is a prime target for timeshare operators. This is a mistake a good friend of mine made a while back. He wasn't really interested in owning a second home that he was only going to use 2 weeks per year. And so his rationale was, I'll buy a timeshare, and even if I overpay for it, that's okay. I have it for 1 to 2 weeks a year, and I will have it for the rest of my life as long as I have a reason to go there. Then he found a reason, and that was a relative was also buying a timeshare in the same complex, in fact, in the same building. And so they went in and they bought their timeshares at roughly the same time. He liked skiing, his relative liked skiing, and both he and his relative wanted to raise their family to be a family of skiers. He bought the same week as his relative, week 52, which is the last week of the year, for a ski chalet or a ski condo up in Vermont. It is quite possibly the best week to have a timeshare because everybody's off that week and it gets snowy up there at that time. Because it was such a popular time and such a popular location, the timeshare company was allegedly running out of inventory, so the cost was more expensive when he bought it than when she bought it just a month earlier. Still, he wanted a vacation with his relatives, so he paid the higher cost. If he annualized the cost of the timeshare over 15 years, which was the life of the mortgage for the unit, he knew that he would come out slightly behind because the cost still wouldn't cover 15 years worth of 1 week vacations, but he did have a guarantee of sorts that he and his relative and their families were going to be vacationing together in the same place at the same time for the next decade and a half at least. And here's the problem, and the same problem exists with anybody that has a timeshare. After a period of time, even paradise starts to get old. He was a skier, but he didn't want to ski in the same place every single year. And you compound that with the fact that the family members that were supposed to ski on his side didn't really want to ski every year, and his relative decided they too didn't want to come back every single year. Add to the fact that he was constantly bombarded by the timeshare company with offers that only made sense to the timeshare company. They sounded very slick in the presentation, but when you put pencil to paper, they made no sense. What was really good in the beginning started to look really bad, in fact, looked really cheesy. And then the ultimate disgrace happened. The timeshare company offered to buy him out for $0. They would offer him nothing, and in return for nothing, he would not have to make the maintenance payments on the unit ever again. By the way, maintenance is simply the cost to maintain the unit every year outside of the actual cost for the mortgage. And what do they do when they buy it from him for nothing? They resell it to somebody else for a lot of money and make a ton of money simply by offering to take him out of his maintenance payments. I believe that he not so politely declined the offer. The next point is expensive jewelry. As you go into retirement, there will undoubtedly be reasons, many more reasons, to buy expensive jewelry in the future than there was in the past. Because every 5 years, your wedding anniversary is big. Every 5 years, a birthday is big. And big anniversaries and birthdays require big presents, right? The problem with expensive jewelry, with the possible exception of something like a rare watch, a Patek Philippe, for example, is that the value of the jewelry is only as high as the melt value of the metal and the wholesale price of the stones. Absolutely no financial value is given to the artisan's work that went into creating the jewelry. This doesn't mean that the anniversary is not important or that he or she won't love the gift, but think about what you could do rather than spending several $1,000s on, say, an anniversary band. You can go to a play. You can go to 10 plays if you'd like. You can have dinner every other week for the next year. All of that and more can be created instead of buying the expensive jewelry. The next point is world travel. Admittedly, this is a tricky one. Travel right now is really expensive unless you happen to be lodging with a relative. And even then, flights are outrageous. The reason I put this last, by the way, is that many people agree with me that buying toys and gifts gets old pretty quickly. But I haven't had a lot of people who really, really enjoy travel say to me, Jeff, you're absolutely right. I will not engage in world travel because of the cost. The experiences are wonderful and they make for great stories later. So from a utility perspective, the enjoyment perspective, you're covered. But know this, if you're talking about travel to a destination outside of the United States, you are in many cases talking about spending 5 figures if you're talking about a couple. 2 plane tickets, plus accommodations, plus things to do, plus meals. You can, of course, find a way to do it for less. You can stay in youth hostels, I suppose, or stay in 2-star hotels, but that's not how people really want to travel, particularly in retirement. And the most important point, there are many, many magical places in the United States that you can go to for about a quarter of the price, simply by doing the proper planning. Don't forget to click subscribe and turn on notifications so that you get alerted the next time I post a video. I post about twice a week. Also, check out my last video on what to do if you are closing in on retirement and you want to catch up on your retirement savings. This is Jeff Schmidt. Thanks for watching.